yonder, climbing high into the sun. Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder. Atom boys, give her the gun. Now
Hello, this is John Aker, call sign Nomad. This is my YouTube channel. The top line of the splash screen is their YouTube is calling a handle, part of the URL to find this channel, youtube.com/@ John Aker, aviating author. And note the dots, the periods between the last four words. That forms the handle. This introduction is the first of more than a dozen videos that I generated that follow my autobiography, recollections, my life in and out of the military. And they will represent planes I flew during the 18 years of active flying status I was on during my 20-year military career as a United States Air Force pilot. I found software that runs in the computer flight simulator world, matching airplanes that I flew in real life. And I narrate them with a narrative stream of consciousness, stories of what was happening in my life during the times when I flew those airplanes. And, well, they're war stories, you know, of course. And in war stories, you have to be careful because the first liar ain't got a chance. You'll learn a little bit about computer flight simulators and videos, the equipment I use to get it done, and we'll have some fun. And check your six back there. I might be on your tail. Nomad is back. Let's take a look at the rest of this series. This is the fifth and final video related to the Boeing 135 airframe. This is the RC135S model, Rivet Ball. Probably the most satisfying for a front-end crew to fly because of the need to coordinate closely with the guys in the back end who did some fantastic work and getting the airplane into a position where they could get those shots, photo intelligence. Everything was oriented, not everything, virtually everything was oriented for the right side capture. So if we were going left side towards the target, you didn't have many sensors looking out that way. So with that in mind, let's get to the video I put together about Rivet Ball, also the subject of a memoir I wrote called The Iron Pumpkin. John Aker's back, Nomad, in the fifth in my series of videos about the 135, which was number 9 on my list, overall list. It's only fitting I devoted a lot of time to this. I got a little over 4,000 hours total flying time in 20 years, and over 2,000 of it was in the 135 airframe. Got a lapel pin from Boeing marking that, showing the airplane and 2,000 hours. The airplane was designed for photo intelligence, photint. And you can see the windows down the side. I think we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And this is a picture of RC135S model 591491. I'll remember remember that serial number, and her last flight, which we'll talk about a little later. And here she's taken off from E-Systems, which was LTV back in those days. Ling Timko did the modifications on this bird. And now we'll pick up where we left off before and talk about the ball. She's an RC135S model. S is in super. Again, look at the engines. Same old J57s. I never got away from those. Had some peculiar looking T-shaped antenna here. Had the typical thimble nose. And it had an addition here. You can see 10 windows down the side. Those windows were optically ground quartz, so they wouldn't fog up or distort. And the mission of this airplane was photo intelligence. And we operated off an island called Shemya, and this is it. One runway, basically east-west. Base ops here. We were stationed in a hangar right here. You can say we had a clear shot to the runway. Our other bird, Rivet Amber, was a different kind. It was an E model, radar intelligence. It was here. She had to snake her way to the runway. There were no taxiways the full length of the runway. So we had the easiest shot, and we were generally first off when they'd scramble the two airplanes. But you had to come down here if we were going to take off to the east. It was a shorter taxi. Taking off to the west, you had to come all the way down here and do a turnaround. And wheeling this beast around on a 150-foot wide runway is, need to be careful. This is one of the hangars. These doors, World War II, they were big enough we could put the entire airplane in here. And these doors were on rollers, and there were hand cranks, but that would take you about a day and a half to crank both these doors open, one that way, one that way. So they had little tugs, aircraft tugs, and they'd get the door open just far enough to nudge that tug in there, and that tug would shove the door open, zip over here, and shove it the other door open. And here's a picture of Rivet Ball sitting there on the ramp just outside the hangar. I believe the hangar should be right over here on this side. You can see those windows a little better. You can see this area up here, painted black, anti-reflection, and a bubble was the bubble turret off of B-29. And a gentleman with the title of manual tracker got to sit up there and look for events coming up over this way from us. And whoever saw it first called gaslight on the intercom, and if I didn't send chills up your spine, nothing would. It meant there was an event coming in, and we were going to capture some good data. This shows you the basic operating area. Again, we were taking off. Houston is about here. We'd rotate out of here about every 5 weeks out to Shemya, which is about here, just inside the Day International. They would scramble us when there was an event imminent, or they hoped was imminent. The Russians would launch from the interior of Russia, and the impact range was here on the Kamchatka Peninsula. So we'd do an orbit out here, and we'd hold this up. If we thought it was really close, we'd start southbound. Idle back just enough airspeed to stay in the air solid. If nothing happened southbound, and we'd haul it around, go full blast on the engines all around, back up here to the top, do the same thing. Because if we were northbound and an event came in, you could see it wasn't any good. We could only collect on the right side. This is also the area where Korean Airlines 007 was shot down. And the story was they were confused with one of our airplanes and strayed over. I doubt seriously they strayed over Russian airspace, but the Russians shot them down anyway. Yeah, I've got the sim paused, and you'll notice the scenery has changed. And that island you see out here probably looks a little similar to that photograph I showed you a minute ago, because it is. This is Shemya. We're headed in there. But before we get to Shemya, I'll tell you a couple more things that happened flying the 135S. We were on alert duty at Shemya. In mid-morning, we got a call from Joint Reconnaissance Center and on the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon. JRC would send tasking orders out to us. They said, it looks like the French are going to test some A-bombs out in the South Pacific. You go get them, would you? And we said, okay. And they said, when? Yeah, as soon as you get there. Okay. Well, we sat down and started flight planning. By mid-afternoon, we were ready to go. And we had a flight plan filed for Hickam, which would be our intermediate stop and briefings. And they called Joint Reconnaissance, the Pentagon people back, the recon staff up there, and says, hey, we're ready to go. And they said, oh, wait a minute, we ain't quite got all our ducks in a row. Won't you just put that off till Monday morning? Okay. There you go. Double time to the parking area, wait 2 hours on the trucks. So we staged through Hickam, got our briefings, picked up a tanker that was dedicated to us. And let's slide another one of these stills out here. Get an idea of where we were. Here are the Hawaiian Islands. We came into Hickam at Oahu. From there we were going to the briefings. I said, well, what are we really supposed to do? And they said, well, just fly around the area in circles till you glow in the dark, and then you can come home. So we weren't sure how much was going to happen, but we were headed from Hickam Air Base to Johnston Atoll, which at one time was a Navy accompanied base. Can't believe it. Was under the command of an Army colonel at this time. And we would scramble out of here when we thought there was an event imminent. This is around 500 or 600 miles. And we would head for these atolls down here in the Marshall Islands. And that was about, this was a good 700,000-800,000 mile trip down here. And we had the tanker pilot that came out here to Johnston for it with us. It was great. I briefed him on refueling in a descent. I hit him after we leveled off. Start taking on fuel. Okay, it's time, and he used the autopilot and rolled that dude into about a 200 foot per minute rate of descent, and it was just fine. We could go up to max weight without falling off, and we spent our time down there. And this is a Navy accompanied tour. I don't know where they put the dependents. Rumor has it once a month they put them all on a cargo plane and haul them up over to Hawaii, so they could do some shopping and wouldn't go stir crazy. So the runway is direction, one runway as usual, and no taxiways down to the end and turn around. Main part of the base, and I remember we took off one night about twilight. They had an outdoor movie theater somewhere in this area, and I swear our right engine, as we were coming down this way, our right engine was number 4 was almost hanging over that movie theater when we went roaring by. And this is my crew when we were down there. That's old 491. You can tell with the windows and those T antennas. My Navigator 1, my Navigator 2, my co-pilot, and I'm here on the end with, I think I had a mustache back in those days. So again, this is the bird we were flying, and didn't mention it earlier, we saw this picture, but taken off from LTV, Ling Temco Vought, in those days at Majors Field, just east of Dallas, 75 miles as I recall. That later became E-Systems, and they were the folks who did all the modifications and put the extras and the goodies on there. I earlier told you about the short tails and the long tails on 135s. This is a tall tail, and this is a different airplane. This is a tanker, but when he finished putting the tall tail on her, you had a hydraulically boosted rudder, and this little item was an air inlet for the Q-spring system. Here's a schematic of it, and I have no idea what it did, how it operated. It had basically fed artificial feel to the rudder pedals, so that they didn't just float in and out. It was more like pushing and feeling wind resistance on the rudder as you put rudder into her. One day we were launching the Rivet Ball out of Shemya. My friend, in fact it was the same fellow I told you about I went through air refueling training with down at Castle. He was sitting in the other airplane watching our takeoff, because once again we beat him to the runway. And we had as usual, a horrendous left crosswind. We always had a crosswind. In fact, to be able to fly out of there, we had to go out and demonstrate to an instructor pilot that we could handle, I believe it was 23, 25 knots crosswind at 50 degrees off the nose, and do 3 landings. That'll put some sweat in your armpits. So we're out there, we're going down, and I'm feeding the aileron into the wind, and opposite rudder to cross control it to keep the nose straight. And I tapped on the rudder pedal, and that rudder pedal floated all the way to the stops. And
It was because of this Q spring. I don't know whether it was iced. I don't recall if they ever came up with an idea of what happened. Whether it was iced over or whether it mechanically broke inside. And I'm scrambling because I'm not controlling this crosswind very good. So I whipped the controls, put both feet hard on the rudder pedals. And I whipped the aileron to neutral and the rudder pedals neutral and began feeding in that left air again. So I knew how much was in there. And we did the main truck on one side lifted off the ground because I didn't have quite enough aileron into her. And my friend looked at it. He's about panicky. He said, "Oh Lord, I don't know what's happening, but it doesn't look good." Anyway, we got her into the air and made sure I kept both feet on the rudder pedals for the rest of the flight. So sometimes strange things happen in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. Here we are back in the old bird, headed down for our landing. This is the same direction we were coming that night about this last story of the ball I wanted to tell you. Yeah, we're gearing full flaps. We're coming in on 28. Runway was 1028. We were westbound, which was good up to a point. And the winds this night were about 50 degrees off the runway heading, around 25 knots. And they'd been having snow and bad weather all evening. This is about 30 minutes after midnight, 13th of January, 1969. I wonder how I remember that night. And it's a lot better night than this day landing here. I'm bouncing all over the skies. I'm flying a GCA, ground controlled approach landing, a precision approach. And we were VFR. I had the runway inside all the way down, even though it was night. And coming in this way, GCA controller called me low on the glide slope a couple of times. And I wasn't too concerned about that because we only had 9,000 feet and didn't like to play around too much. I was like, I knew I was going to have some trouble getting her on the ground. So we're on the ground, brakes, speed breaks up, and we're getting slowed down, not too much. And I'm going to pause her right about here. This is where we were. My co-pilot and I were mostly concerned about the crosswind. They gave us a runway condition reading that was well within limits for landing. But they didn't give us the details. And I always tell people, keep an eye out for those people that are trying to kill you because they're lurking around the corner. They had sweepers. They swept the runway. They were getting a little buildup of snow, so they put some isopropyl on the runway, which turned what snow was there to slush. And we began hydroplaning, and we hydroplaned right to the end. Now this looks like a real smooth, just an overrun here. There was about 10 feet of dirt past the end of this runway, and a 40-foot cliff, which doesn't show here. The other thing that bothered me was when I realized what was happening, landing by cutting the inboard engines somewhere around midfield. It was a procedure that's in the Dash 1, but we didn't like to do it if we didn't have to, because it dumped a lot of the equipment in the back end, the remaining generator on the outboards couldn't handle the electrical load. So I was committed to the landing, and going off center line here and down on this cliff to get approach lights at runway level, there were 2 rows of telephone poles supporting the approach lights for the runway. I didn't want to go off the center line. This was more of a slope than this was, and I wanted to go off here. The problem was the brakes, the anti-skid brakes, as good as they were, were not slowing us. And the nose wheel steering, I remember cranking that nose wheel steering, that little wheel to my left, full travel both directions, and absolutely nothing. The nose wheel tires were hydroplaning as well. And I whipped the ailerons over. And you may remember me talking about that and demonstrating how you could bicycle an airplane to get it to move a little bit, not a whole lot, as long as you had aerodynamic flow over the ailerons. And that's what got us, and it was the longest time before I remembered that was that trick Trousdale taught me, 3 years before. I always figured Trousdale was in the jump seat that night. So we went off here, and that's not a smooth transition. Too bad it wasn't that bad in the airplane. And to wrap these up, this flight up, let me bring out a couple more stills. That's Shemya, and in here you can see that depression a little bit better, that 40-foot cliff that was down there. And this is what she looked like in the aftermath. This is the runway. 40-foot drop, not straight down, but down. Number 4 engines high and dry, and they salvaged that one. This crack in the fuselage was wide enough that one of the crew members stepped through it as his escape hatch. Several went down the front chute. Here's another view from the side. And here's one more shot of the bird. Rivet Ball leaving LTV back in the day. And there were 18 of us on board that night. And that's the motto up here at the top. We walked away. Or as one guy said, walked hell, we ran. And everybody signed it. LTV was great. They 18 copies of this photo and rushed them up to Shemya and passed them out. We all took turns and we made sure all 18 of us had a copy of this with everybody's signature on. My name, here's where I signed right up here. Right up by the nose. And I recognize most of these names. It's a little hard to read their handwriting. So I met with the accident board, which if you've never been through an accident board is just a fun time. I remember 2 tables to a row and 3 rows going back in this narrow room, and out in front of this is a single steel folding chair, and that's where I got to sit. The best thing I can say is I'm damn proud all 18 walked away with some minor injuries, and that the board held it was weather and operational error and no crew error contributing. So that pretty well finished my tour in Alaska. And we'll see, leave the old ball sitting out here in the snow. And it was time to rotate back. I put my wife and kids on an airplane out of Fairbanks Airport, Alaska Airlines. But I couldn't go with them because they had to keep me around to fly one more flight in the D model. So I got that one out of the way and flew back to the States, continental United States. One I did admit that I really wanted you to know. I was getting close to the end before my family flew out on the Freedom Bird. We were headed for the Officers Club for a Saturday night dance, and it was just across the street. Pat and I were walking to the club, and one of the wink weenies says, "Hey, Acre, your orders came in for your next assignment. You want to know where you're going?" And I'd heard some rumors, and I said, "No, sir, I'll pass." And that son of a bitch ruined the whole night. He says, "You're going to Korea." And I said, "Thanks." I told you my family flew out. I caught a hop to McCord, or to Seattle, and then was headed for Indianapolis, where my family was. And my next civilian flight was in a 727. It looked like a lot like the airplanes I've been flying. But I told you, in the KC-135, you rotated over 8 degrees and you might kill yourself. And that airline jock pulled her off, cleaned her up, and honked that nose up to at least 20, 25 degrees, I swear. And I'm hanging on to both armrests saying, "I'm going to die, I'm going to die." What sort of an author would I be if I didn't finish up the story of the Rivet Ball with this image? This is a cover of a short memoir I did recently, 50 years after the accident at Shemya. I titled it "The Iron Pumpkin." Couple of reasons. We were in the infirmary, the base hospital, being looked over after the accident, and a major from the tower rushed in and said, "Did they tell you the last 2,000 feet of the runway had not been cleared?" My navigator looked at him and said, "Didn't make a damn bit of difference. By that time we'd already turned into a pumpkin." The iron came from the metal of the airplane. The name stuck, and I used it for this memoir. A drawing by one of our crew members on there. And the aircraft serial number, I've mentioned it a couple times, 591491. What I hadn't mentioned up to this point was my serial number ended in 491. I had never noticed that in all the weeks I spent out there at the Rock and flying almost 30 sorties with the old girl. Never noticed that till one of the maintenance NCOs pointed out to me after the accident, so I tied that all together for the cover and put her out. So let me get back to the finish on this last of the videos on the 135. So this is, next time we get together, I'll be in the Republic of Korea, my southern tour, South Korea. Reminding you, Nomad's reminding you to keep your head on a swivel and check your six, and I'll see you in the air.
If you enjoyed some of this material, you might reach up there and click that like button. Want to come back, hit the subscribe to this channel. This is John Aker, call sign Nomad, flying flight simulators based on my career as a U.S. Air Force pilot.